today. I work for Nova Systemic. My main job here, I'm a graphic designer, so I do a lot of the visual marketing materials for them, but I also develop these e-textiles project like the one you're doing today. Textiles and fashion, I do have a background in. I majored in fashion merchandising, so I know a lot about sewing, a lot about the fashion industry, and it's really great to incorporate technology into some of the education I had. They're trying to start incorporating this into the medical industry, putting it into clothing in order to monitor heart rates, which is pretty awesome. Or maybe just something more simple like using LEDs to put on the back of a jacket for a bike rider to know which direction they're turning. Something as simple as that. So now I'm sure you guys want to get to the good stuff of this awesome project. So depending on which one you have, you should have, there's 3 different kits out there. There's one of the fire emoji. And then there's this one here as well. Don't have a battery in that one currently. And then your little kissy face. Yeah, depending on which one you're doing. All right, so I'm gonna switch over to the different camera to get to my hands a little bit more. So give me just 1 second to switch over. Okay. All right, so if you open your kits, you should have a few things. You should have a battery holder, your coin cell 3-volt battery, your little LED, this tiny little thing, try not to lose it. Sewing needle, some conductive thread, a little pin. You can use this at the end if you want to pin it to stuff at the end. Everyone should have a small white round felt piece. Another round piece, it should either be black or yellow depending on which project you're making. And then all of your little parts, again, depending on which project you're making. Stuff that wasn't included in your kit that we're also going to need, you'll need some type of marker. I'm using a fabric marker that actually disappears on the fabric over time, but you can use any regular marker, doesn't really matter. And then some type of scissors, whatever you kind of have. I'm using a smaller thing because we're cutting a small little hole just for the LED to shine through, so you don't need anything big, but whatever you got, as long as it cuts. And then also, I'm using a hot glue gun, and mine has multiple temperature settings. I'm using a lower temperature just because they are small pieces. You can also use liquid glue, that's fine too. It just might take a little bit longer to dry, so just keep that in mind when you do your project. So before we actually get starting into assembling or gluing, we need to learn a little bit more about electricity. So I'm gonna pull, you guys all should have these little guides here. Let me see if I can get it without getting a glare on it. Hopefully you can kind of see that. So what's a basic circuit? So a circuit is basically the flow of power from a power source to a component back to that power source. So as you can see in the diagram, we have our power, which is what you guys have in your little kits. Your electricity is going to flow out to your component and around. For our instance, we'll be using your little LED component here. So what exactly does this mean? So it means that your power is going to flow conventional current-wise. It's going to flow from the positive end of the power source to your LED component, and that energy is going to be converted into light on your LED, and then from your negative back to the power source, creating that endless circle of what's called current. All right, and so again, if we look back at this smaller LED, see if I can focus on it. There we go. All right, so if you look very closely at these little signs, there's a positive side and a negative side. This means that this has polarity. So only current can flow in one direction. So for instance, if I were to take my battery pack and I connected the positive to the negative side, this would not, the LED would not light up because the electricity isn't flowing in the right direction. So when connecting our circuit, we have to make sure that your positives are connected and your negative sides are connected. And then I just want to take a closer look back at this battery pack. So if you see, maybe, there's a little switch here. So how does a switch work in electricity? So I'm going to draw this out for you just to kind of understand how that kind of works a little better. So let's see, we got our battery here, plus, minus, and let's say we got this little LED. I'm going to draw the one that we have here. Boop. All right, negative, positive. All right, so their power is going to flow from the positive, and we're going to have a break. This is your switch here. Back to the positive, all the way to the negative. All right, so this part here, as you see, the circuit is open. They're not connecting, so your power is going to try to flow through that line, and wait, it stops. It can't keep going because the path isn't closed. It's like a drawbridge. Your traffic cars can't go across because it's not connecting. So your energy can't flow through to light your LED. So when these connect, your energy is going to keep flowing through, your electricity is going to go through, your LED will light and continue the cycle. So that's just how your basic switch works within that battery pack. So now that we got all that understanding how electricity works, we're going to get into the project. So if everybody wants to grab their circle, either yellow or black. All right. And then just start laying the pieces down on top of the felt, however you want to arrange them. So I'm just going to arrange my emoji together here. Line that up. Okay. And hopefully everybody's doing okay lining up their pieces. Once you got all your pieces on where you want, we have to mark where we want to cut the hole for the LED. If we don't cut a hole, your LED isn't going to shine through as bright, especially if you're doing the fire one, because it just doesn't really flow through the black felt very well. So I'm actually going to take my sewing needle and I'm going to poke through exactly where I want the middle of my LED to go. So I want mine about right here. So I'm just going to poke through my project. I'm going to pull the felt pieces up and I'm just going to pull those 3 off that I have. So now I just have the pin exactly where I want in my project. And where I have that, I'm going to, if you have the yellow, you can mark with your marker, but the black is going to be a little bit harder to do that. So I'm just going to cut. Going to cut a small hole. Keep in mind that your LED, that yellow part is where the light is. So it doesn't need to be a very big slit for the LED to shine through. All right, and now you can see I'm going to glue my pieces down. So just gonna take glue. If you're using the hot glue gun, be careful if mine's working. Is everybody able to get a hole cut in there? You guys have any questions on the way, feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away. Okay. Are we almost there, the Libris? All right, cool. All right, so we're gonna move on. I want everybody to grab your white circle here. There you go. All right, so now we're gonna draw out our circuit. So what's gonna happen is we're gonna end up something like this. So you're gonna have your battery pack on one side and your LED on the other. So first thing, what I like to do, because we're putting components on two different sides, I like to label which side's my positive side and which side's my negative side. So I'm just gonna put a plus sign on one, negative on the other. And I see my plus is on my right. I'm gonna flip so it's right on the left on this side and on the right here. Okay. And then I'm going to take my battery and make sure that your positive ends are on the positive side of what you just drew and your negative sides are on the negative end of what you just drew. You can place that down. And I like to just draw a little circle around it to see where that goes. And then I'm gonna flip it over to the other side. And I wanna see where I had my hole. I wanna make sure that my white doesn't hang over where I put that LED. So I'm gonna place that down. I'm gonna fold it up and mark where I had that little hole on that white. And then I'm gonna place my LED on top. Again, making sure your positive is on the positive side and the negative is on the negative side. You can, that just fell off. Bring it up a little closer for you. Okay. I'm gonna draw a little circle around that. Now this step is optional, but I like to do it just because it's easier to work with. So I like to glue the back of my components onto my felt. So if you're doing the LED, I recommend to put it on the felt first and stick the LED on top of it versus trying to get the glue on the LED because you'll probably burn yourself in that process and no one wants that. So we're gonna put a little bit of glue. Again, making sure your positives are on your positives, your negatives are on your negative side, and try not to get any glue in those holes because you'll be sewing through these little tabs later. And if you get hot glue in, it is not easy to sew through hot glue. I have had someone break a needle in the past because they were trying to sew through hot glue. So that's fun. All right, and then I'm going to put a little hook glue there. I'm going to line up what I just outlined. All right. So now I should have my positive end on my positive side, my negative on my negative, flip over, make sure again, negative to negative, positive to positive. Just helps to double check these things because you don't want to sew it and then have to do it again because you connected the wrong sides. I've done it, it's not fun. I'm gonna let you guys, we're gonna learn how to thread a needle. So if everyone wants to grab their needle, and you see it has this little hole in it, that's called the eye of the needle. Put that on the side for now. All right, and then we are going to grab our conductive thread. So this is basically just really thinly pulled wire made to be more flexible, malleable for sewing. So it can fray a little bit more than regular thread. So if you see, you probably can't see this in the frame. Maybe I have some like little fraying on the top. So I'm actually just gonna cut the top of this to give it a fresh cut, make it easier to thread my needle. And I like to get it in between my fingers and push it through the needle is the easiest way. So a little trick about this thread though is we don't want to double it up and tie the two ends together because it makes it easier for tangling. And that's not good in this sense because you can short circuit your thing and cross your negatives and positives and your circuit won't work. So I just like to have a little tail. Hold on, So I just like to have a little tail, and because it's kind of wire-like, you can just twist the two ends together. Like so. And then that extra tail you have, we're just going to tie a knot at the bottom. You might need to tie a few because the knot might not be big enough and it will just go right through the felt when you pull it. So tie a few knots on top of each other. Just to make sure it doesn't pull through. I think I'm going to do 3 knots. Like so. I know that's kind of hard to see. So we have the needle threaded. All right, now believe it or not, the sewing might be the hardest part of the project. This is the point where people kind of struggle with. So hopefully we can get through this easily. All right, so I'm gonna start on the positive end of my battery pack. You can start at any sew tab, doesn't really matter which one. And I usually like to start sewing from the back of whatever component I'm going through, just because it makes it a little bit neater. So I'm going to push my needle. Hopefully I can focus on this. Maybe. All right. I'm going to push my needle through the felt. You see the needle right outside that component. And when you're pulling through, because we don't have those two ends tied together, it helps to hold the end of the needle where the thread is so you don't unthread your needle again. And you want to pull all the way through to make sure that knot fully comes through. And then once you're going to go through the sew tab and down and pull all the way through. You want to make sure you get a tight connection on those sew tabs because that's what's connecting your power. And we have to do that 3 times just to make sure that we get a good connection. So again, I'm going to go on the outside of the component, pull tightly through, and make sure when you're going back through the fabric you just pulled out, make sure you're not going around, because you're going to loop your fabric like this and you're going to end up pulling it. So don't do that. Make sure we're going. So I came up, I'm going to go back down through the sew tab. And again, one more time. Back down. All right, so I should have 3 loops around that area. So now we want to connect the positive side of our battery holder to the positive side of our LED. So I'm just going to sew 1 stitch across to the battery holder, you can see, just to keep it secure. If it's loose, again, you could short circuit, which I'll explain a little bit later. But just make sure you don't have any loose threads. You don't want anything flopping around. So I'm on the outside of that positive tab. I'm going to make sure again one more time that I just sewed the positive tab, and I'm going to sew the positive tab of my LED. And again, I'm going to secure this with 3 loops. So I'm going to go through, positive, down, and down. So then I have 3 loops on there, and I'm going to go to my back and I'm going to tie a knot off. So you can either just tie the knot and get it really close, but I like to pick up one of these threads. And then you're going to have a little loop left, and I'm just going to make a knot and pull it straight down. Make sure that knot's well. So the reason why I'm not continuing to start on my negative sides is because those have to be 2 different connections, or wires in this case. If you were to continue it, it's just going to bypass your LED because it wants to go to the path of least, it requires the least amount of energy to go through. So for instance, if our little energy path is trying to go through and it hits this, it takes more energy for those things to go through the light. So if I were to just connect it and keep going like this, it's just going to go past the back part of your LED and it's not going to light up. So we are actually, once you knot that off, we are going to cut that thread and try to cut it pretty close to the knot. And then we are going to do the same thing on the negative side. Part about this project, because it's not something that we use a lot anymore, but it's a great skill to have. Just if you ever pop a button on a shirt or something, it's great to know how to do. So I'm just going to start the negative side of this. I'm going to again go through the outside part of my LED, pull tight, go through the middle, outside, back through the middle, outside, through the middle again, and we got our 3 loops. Stitch this downward. And then we're going to stitch back down through the hole. Hopefully you all are getting this. If not, let me know what you're struggling with and maybe I can help.
Do you have any questions, you guys? No. We're still catching up. We're almost done.
Yeah, I figured it's a little hard to go at your pace sometimes because
you're doing so great, and thank you for your patience with us.
Oh, no problem. It's sometimes this is easier something to show in person because it's such small little pieces.
We got like a big tangle with our thread on the very first sewing part.
Yeah.
I had to like completely cut and redo it. So thank you for understanding.
Yeah, like yeah, this stuff is almost kind of hard to work with sometimes because it will tangle. So you have to be, you know, it's not very forgiving, I guess is a good way to say it.
How did you end your, when you got the positives attached, how did you end the knot? Did you tie a knot or did you?
Yeah, so I mean, most people will probably just tie a knot. So like a common way is probably the easiest is just to make a knot. And I like to, you know, pull it so I have just a little bit. And I actually take my needle, sorry, I'm the wrong way. And I'll put it through that hole and pull that hole all the way to the end, like close to the fabric, and just pull the other side. So it gets as close to the fabric as possible. Okay. As we're finishing up, I'm just gonna explain. So right now my project has like some long extra pieces on some of my stitches. So where those knots are, I'm just gonna trim those to be short because we don't want this crossing to my positive side because that's going to short circuit. And basically what a short circuit means is that it's connecting your battery to itself, which will discharge your batteries in some cases immediately. I've had a project like this before that discharged in about 30 minutes. The battery gets really hot. So it's not, in some cases when you're using higher voltage, it's not something safe to do. So before we put any battery in it, we want to make sure that we trim all of these extra tails off. So I'm just going to trim up any of that excess thread. Make sure I don't have anything flopping around. Make sure my positive and negative lines are staying separated. And then after you trim those, feel free to insert your battery. Make sure your plus side is facing up. Push that in. And then turn your switch on and it lights up. Hopefully everybody's is lighting up. All right, and once you get that tested, make sure it's on. You can turn off that battery pack. And then we're gonna take the face of what we made earlier and make sure you're lining up that LED again to make sure that lines up right where you want that light to come through. And we're gonna glue it down. Trying to pull off all these extra little hot glue bits. You get those strings, you know what I mean? It's like webbing. All right, so you should have that together. Again, I'm going to turn it on. Probably can't see it, the camera, but it is on. You can see his. All right, and then finally, once you have that all glued together, your last step is you just have your little pin. If you want to add this on, make sure you know where it opens. Mine opens downward, so I want to push down on it. So, and I want mine to be on the top of mine, like this. Flip that over. Some hot glue right here. Push it down. Hopefully you should have a successful pin project. Woohoo!